This is CBC Here and Now.
Now, there are in excess of 19 victims, and we believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them.
An unthinkable tragedy. At least 19 people dead after a mass shooting in Nova Scotia. Police combed through more than a dozen crime scenes as people grieve a devastating loss. Good evening, I'm Carolyn Stokes. Just ahead, we'll have the latest COVID-19 updates for this province. But first, people are trying to come to terms with what is the biggest mass shooting in Canada's history right next door in Nova Scotia. At least 19 people are dead, so is the suspected shooter. Police are investigating what happened and why.
We're relatively confident we've identified all the crime scenes. However, we've been unable to fully examine the crime scenes because, for instance, we have had 5 structure fires, most of those being residences, and we believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
Today, police began combing through more crime scenes. They've identified 16 locations. The search for bodies is ongoing as several houses were burned to the ground. We're learning more about the victims today. RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson was killed during the rampage yesterday. Another victim is a well-liked teacher. 2 worked in healthcare. 2 others worked as correctional officers. A family was also killed, a mother, father, and daughter who had recently moved to Nova Scotia from Alberta. The violence started Saturday night in Portapique, about 90 minutes north of Halifax. But the crime scenes associated with this mass shooting, well, they cover a wide area. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed shock and grief this morning about this weekend's multiple murders in Nova Scotia, and he called on Canadians to pull together and not allow an act of senseless violence to defeat them.
No one man's action can build a wall between us and a better day, no matter how evil, how thoughtless, or how destructive. As families grieve the loss of a loved one, all Canadians are standing with them.
Trudeau says it's clear how painful it is for the loved ones of those killed in Nova Scotia to mourn in isolation during this pandemic. He says a virtual vigil for the Nova Scotia victims will be held this Friday evening on Facebook, and he will attend that vigil online. Cheers and shouts of thank you today for Constable Chad Morrison. He's the RCMP officer wounded during the manhunt in Nova Scotia on the weekend. Morrison was seen with his arm bandaged, waving to the crowd as he was welcomed by his family. And here at home, the flags at Confederation Building have been lowered to half-mast to pay respect to those who lost their lives. And Premier Dwight Ball offered condolences today.
So what happened in Nova Scotia this weekend is unimaginable for any province or any community. Let's hope that never again we will see this senseless act of destruction of life and of violence. Last night I spoke to Premier McNeil to offer my condolences on behalf of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, people who live in the community are still trying to process the magnitude of this violent attack. Joining me now is Sandra Hope. She's from Goose Bay, Labrador, but has been living in Enfield for the past 6 months. Thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. So how are you feeling today?
Well, I gotta say I'm pretty sad for all the families that's going through this from yesterday, and they're in quarantine, and it's kind of a shock to everybody, really. So you wouldn't expect something like this in your own neighborhood.
No, definitely not. And you live very close to the gas station where the police finally did take down the attacker. Can you tell us what you heard and what you saw yesterday?
Yes, I'm about a kilometer away from the Enfield gas station there, the Irving. So it's just on the next street to us there. And where I live next door to a fire hall as well, we're used to hearing the sirens and the noises and that, but just before noontime yesterday, we heard a lot of cop vehicles going around along with the fire station, and I guess everybody was on the go yesterday. And you know, we thought it was kind of a loud commotion and passed it off. Never thought of it anything more than that. And about a half an hour after, I guess we found out what it actually was.
And what went through your mind when you did find out what had happened?
Well, I guess the first thing that goes through your mind is like, that's a bit too close for comfort. And you know, the scare of it all kind of sets into you. You know, that could be at your doorstep if it's that close.
This was a 12-hour rampage, and the gunman went to 16 different locations. There are 16 different crime scenes now. Do you think that the police should have alerted the public to what was going on sooner than they did, like sent out some sort of public emergency alert on people's phones?
Yeah, that was a big question today, Carolyn, that a lot of people are asking the RCMP why there wasn't an alert out, because, you know, people count on those alerts and emergencies, you know, for their own safety and safety of their families. And, you know, something obviously failed there that didn't go out.
And for you personally, I mean, you could have very easily have been out in the area where you live so close to that gas station, having no idea that that was happening.
Yeah, and the funny thing, Carolyn, about that was it was about the time of the day that me and my spouse usually go out and grab our coffee and get out for a drive just to get out, you know, from the quarantine, being stuck in the house. And for some strange reason yesterday we said, no, let's just stay home today and not bother with the ride. Otherwise we would have been right in the midst of it.
Yeah, definitely too close for comfort. So what's it like there today? What's the mood like in the community?
Well, I was talking to my neighbor downstairs. She's a nurse over in the emergency in Truro, and it was very sad listening to the stories. She said, like, it was so chaotic, so stressful, and you know, just it's sinking into everybody today what's going on, and it's calm after the storm, I guess you could say.
Well, Sandra Hope, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Well, CBC has more in-depth coverage on the Nova Scotia tragedy starting at 6:30 Newfoundland time with hosts Tom Murphy and Amy Smith from CBC Nova Scotia. And tonight at 8:30 on CBC News Network and CBC Gem, a live special covering the events from Nova Scotia, hosted by Carol McNeil.
Well, Carolyn, some people in remote areas are doing better than others during this pandemic. You remember that couple that decided to drop off the planet and stay alone in Little Bay Islands? Well, they have some pandemic survival advice.
Another day with no new cases of COVID-19 in the province. The total number of active cases in the province is 63. But the Premier is warning it's not time to start easing the lockdown.
No, now is not the time. You just simply cannot start to relax your actions.
So when should restrictions start to ease? Here and Now's Peter Cowan was asking the Premier about that today. He's live in the newsroom right now. So Peter, what did they tell you?
Carolyn, the simple answer is even they don't know what the standard is going to be for when to start easing these restrictions. There's no specific benchmark in terms of the number of cases they want to see in the province or the number of new cases they're seeing on a daily basis. They do have some general guidelines though, and here's what the Chief Medical Officer of Health kind of laid out is what they're going to be looking for.
First and foremost, there has to be a period of time of slowed growth before we can even consider doing anything. So at the moment, we are looking through what those indicators would be and what that would mean for Newfoundland and Labrador. And when we have more information on that, certainly we will be sharing.
So when she talks there about slow growth, my question was, wouldn't that include things like no cases and single-digit cases like we've seen over the last week and a half? And the health minister said that basically they do not have a standard. It's not that they're holding back information, it's that they're looking elsewhere to figure out when the right time is to move.
We could make stuff up for you if that would help. Back to the KSR, we don't tell you because we don't have a certain answer. There are no certain answers. And what we're doing is just like everybody else. We're looking at the best available evidence. We're seeing what's happened in jurisdictions that have gone before us. And we are trying to apply those lessons in any and every conceivable way to Newfoundland and Labrador.
Now, Haggie did mention other countries like Denmark and Germany that are sort of farther along in their epidemic so far. But the other thing they're going to be looking at is modeling data. And we did get a hint today from the health minister that they are expecting to have new models out over the next day or two, which Carolyn will give us a bit of a glimpse as to what the next at least month or two may look like.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. That's Here and Now's Peter Cowan reporting live. Well, OceanX won't be getting any more federal money. The company had requested financial help from Ottawa, citing the ongoing pandemic as the reason for a drop in cargo volumes. It has currently tied up this ship, the Avalon, at the port in Montreal and has reduced the number of sailings. The company says it needs about $2 million a week to make up for the decline in business and maintain full service, but Ottawa said no. Besides tying up this ship, it has also laid off 50 employees. Well, the FFAW's Crab Committee is recommending delaying the fishery to May 11th. President Keith Sullivan says they're concerned about harvester safety during the coronavirus pandemic. Harvesters work in close proximity to one another on fishing vessels, and physical distancing isn't always possible. He says they're also asking for a 1-month extension to the fishery. Well, people across the province are adjusting to life in isolation, but there's one family that had a head start. On New Year's Eve, the province turned out the lights on Little Bay Islands as the community had been resettled. But one family stayed behind to live off the grid. Anthony spoke with them today.
Well, two people from Newfoundland started to self-isolate before any of us had even heard of that term. Michael and Georgina Parsons, you might recall, decided to stay in Little Bay Islands when that town ceased to exist on New Year's Eve, and Michael and Georgina join us now. So did you two know something that the rest of us didn't?
Well, we'd love to be able to say we did, but unfortunately not when it comes to the pandemic.
When you saw the crisis starting in Asia and then moving to Italy and coming to Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada, when did you two realize this was serious?
To be honest, Anthony, it's still all so unbelievable to us because we're so far removed. So when I first heard about it, over in Asia, it just seemed it was going to stay there, sort of a thing. I don't think it hit home for me until, it got to Canada and then Newfoundland and then, deaths here and deaths all over the world. So we just feel for everybody and hope everyone's doing the best they can, and maybe they can learn something going forward once everything gets back to normal. Hopefully they can take away some, they've learned a few new things or maybe some lifestyle change or whatever. Try to see the positive.
It's almost like you guys are living in a sci-fi movie where you decide you're going to drop off the planet. A lot of people thought you were crazy. Now you look like geniuses. And yet you do this and then the rest of the world is struck by this. Did you ever feel like you were living in a movie?
We have actually, and I do quite a bit of reading and a lot of science fiction reading and stuff. I've read these scenarios and actually just finished reading a novel by Cormac McCarthy called The Road, where it's an apocalyptic story. And but we never assumed that it would come down to this, but it is surreal, and sometimes we have to kind of scratch our head and say, are we living in the Matrix or is this actually real?
Tell me about the decision you made a little while ago to shut down your Facebook site because people around the world were following you guys.
We decided just to take a break. A lot of these social media sites can be overwhelming, and we were certainly overwhelmed, but in a positive way with the response to the site. But we decided to take a break just to enjoy the solitude.
Give me a sense as to why you decided to go back online.
It's something we were thinking about for a while, and of course this pandemic I think really brought it home because we knew how much people enjoyed the positivity and the change, and to see, say, our photos and hear our stories. So in a large part it was because we wanted to bring some people some more joy.
And I guess as a lot of people are trying to find ways to be self-sufficient in this crisis, you guys have almost mastered that, so you actually have good advice to give people.
Well, we've done a lot of planning, and which unfortunately a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to do with this COVID crisis. They were forced into it in very short time periods, but we planned this thing out for months and talked about it for years. And so we went into this fully aware of kind of what to expect, and we could we could ride out the apocalypse really with all the supplies and the planning that we've done. So we feel we're in pretty good shape. So we can certainly offer up some of that advice.
Well, listen, it's really good to check in with you both. You certainly look like you have some kind of Nostradamus quality. All the best, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony.
Well, so much has changed in our society in recent weeks. Regular routines, often taken for granted, have stopped entirely. Well, tonight, our Terry Roberts is shining a spotlight on minor hockey and how an abrupt end to the season was an especially brutal blow for those in their final year.
When I look at these, I think about the people I won them with and how fun it was to go to these towns and compete for a week and win a medal.
We all just wish we were out there having a fun time with each other.
Yeah, it was a terrible way to end. It was saddening for a lot of us not being able to play it again.
For hundreds of young men and women in this province, Easter week was their final shot at minor hockey glory, including Bradley Myrick behind me of St. Philip's. But of course that didn't happen because of the pandemic. These days, this is as close as an 18-year-old can get to organized hockey. Alone, on his street, a hockey ball and rickety net.
I'm Bradley Myrick. I play for the Northeast Eagles in Torbay, Newfoundland, and I should have been chasing down my third gold medal this week.
But hockey in Canada is cancelled. That means more than 10,000 minor hockey players in this province have been benched. For nearly 500 players, it means their final minor hockey memories are likely behind them. That's because these players are aging out.
I was really sad for a while, but you can't change what's happening, sadly, but it's been a hard time. I'm not allowed to see my friends. I can't go to school to get my education. I'm not allowed to play the sports that I love, and you get bored of it after a while.
And for elite players like Tanner Humber-Dredge, it means a lost opportunity to display his skills before hockey scouts at the Atlantics.
It's been difficult, especially with the whole getting over not being able to graduate, not finishing hockey. Just really confusing.
I'm bored. Everybody's bored. They want to go out. They want to socialize. We want to see each other. Like, you can play all the video games in the world, but not actually being able to interact with people, that's what really sucks.
So this is the new reality. Living in a bubble, trying to fight off the boredom and thoughts of a last game that could have been.
That was a good shot.
Terry Roberts, CBC News, Portugal Cove, St. Philip's.
This weather update is brought to you by the Healthcare Foundation Home Lottery. Bonus deadline is midnight Friday, May 15th. Order tickets now at hcfhomelottery.ca.
Ashley is here now with a look at the weather forecast. And Ashley, it was a very snowy day in St. John's yesterday, but with all the rain that followed, it's almost like it never even happened.
Yeah, and especially today, it's absolutely beautiful out there with that sunshine finally. But in other areas through central and the west coast, that wasn't the case. Temperatures were much cooler, which means everything that fell was snow. Anywhere from 20 to as much as 30 centimeters was recorded in some cases. But temperatures today, especially through Corner Brook, take a look at where we were sitting, 9 degrees earlier this afternoon. That temperature has since dropped, but that's where we saw as a daytime high. So I'm sure a lot of that snow that did fall melted. Otherwise, we've got temperatures between 3 to 6 degrees and then cooler up through Labrador, again below zero for Lab West. Now, as we head through the night tonight, the winds also that are happening on the west, or rather the eastern portion of the island will die down eventually. We'll start to see some flurries redevelop or light snow along the west coast. Could pick up a few centimeters with that. And then coastal areas of Labrador also looking at some snow tonight, anywhere from 10 to as much as 20 centimeters for northern portions of the coast. But the other thing to note for Labrador is the chilly temperatures for Lab West, going down to the minus 20s tonight. The record for the low is minus 22 from 1970, so we could potentially break that. But with those cool temperatures, wind chills will be feeling closer to the minus 30 mark. So certainly going to be a cold morning, but then as you head through the day, those temperatures should rebound quite nicely up into the minus 3 degree range with plenty of sunshine for you in Lab City. Otherwise, just some flurries possible for scattered flurries possible for the rest of the Big Land, and then we've got some morning flurries possible for Corner Brook, and then your temperature will be a little bit cooler tomorrow, sitting around the 3 degree range. But the other thing to note is by morning, the winds will have died right down for areas along the Avalon. But then the next weather maker is going to move in. This one's going to be a little bit messy, mainly affecting eastern portions of the island, looking like it'll start as snow. Rather some rain for the Avalon. You'll see that snow towards Burin Peninsula and northwestern portion of the Avalon, as well as Bonavista. Could see some areas of freezing rain, and then in behind that it'll change back over to snow. So quickly by evening hours that should move out of the way, and then it looks like a lovely evening on tap for the rest of the island. Now, as far as snowfall goes, bullseye looks like it'll be in the northwest. Could see anywhere from 10 to 15 centimeters with this one. Otherwise, a trace to as much as 10 centimeters is possible. Into Wednesday, looking beautiful to start the day. Temperatures into the 8 to 10 degree range. Note Port aux Basques, though, 3 degrees. That's because our next weather maker is going to move in. It is going to bring you the area of either showers or flurries first, and then as we head into the evening and overnight, that's when we're going to see that snow and or rain spread across the island into Thursday morning. So something to watch for sure, but I just wanted to share this lovely photo of Jonathan's Pond, another mirror image, which is gorgeous there just outside of Gander. Thanks to David Brophy for sending that in, and if you have any weather photos to share with us, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
Just gorgeous. Thanks so much, Ashley. We'll talk to you tomorrow. one thing got back to normal this morning in St. John's. Recycling pickup resumed today after it was halted for the past month because of the pandemic. Your recycling pickup occurs on the same day as your garbage collection, and that will happen once a month. And there's no limit on the number of bags you can put out. And as we leave you tonight, another taste of winter. Here's a look at the weather on the West Coast. This past weekend, a messy day for parts of the province yesterday with snow falling in many communities. Time to crack out the shovel again. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. Coming up, we have special coverage of the tragic events in Nova Scotia this past weekend. News from CBC Nova Scotia is next. Good night.